Welcome to episode 7 of the Brownie Knits podcast. I'm your host, Gina, also known as Brownie Knits on Instagram and Ravelry. And I'm very excited about this episode because this is the Block 1 launch episode for the Brownie Knits 2015 Block Blanket Along. So I hope that you are going to join us in our knit along. But if not, there's plenty of content in the episodes if you don't care to join in too. But I hope you do. I hope it's fun. I'm pretty nervous about it. I'm excited, but I'm also nervous. I don't know. I always doubt myself. Always do that. But anyway, if you are a returning viewer, thanks so much for coming back. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. It's good to have you here. I get so excited every time I see a new view on YouTube or a subscriber, an Instagram follower, and most especially when people join the Brownie Knits Ravelry group. And the Brownie Knits Ravelry group on that board is where we will be having any discussion about the block blanket as we go through this year. So I hope you all had a great new year. We were pretty quiet here. I didn't even stay up till midnight. I dozed off before then, but that's okay. Yeah, we really didn't have too much going on. So I thought that I would go kind of straight into talking about Block 1 and the Block Blanket Along in case you wanted to grab the pattern and knit along with the podcast on the block. So if you want, the block pattern for Block 1 is up in Ravelry, and it's also on BrownieKnits.com. It is a free download, and the first file will just have the instructions for Block 1. You can find it in Ravelry. I put it under Brownie Knits 2015 Block Blanket Along is the pattern name in Ravelry. If you go over to the Ravelry, Brownie Knits Ravelry group, you'll also see the link there because I'll post that as well. I'm recording on January 6, 2014, but this podcast and the Block 1 will go live on January 7th, 2015. Sorry, I said 2014, didn't I? 2015. Now that I don't write checks very much, I guess saying it is like getting used to the new year. So, all right, so Block 1 is, I wanted to keep Block 1 kind of simple to ease us into it. I figured after the holidays and being stressed out with everything and being so busy with all of the gift knitting and stuff like that, that we would want something a little easy to kind of move us into the block blanket. Some of the blanket blocks in the future months will have lace, some will have cables, things like that, but don't be scared by that. We'll work through all of it. But this one just is knitting and purling to kind of just get us into it. So here it is. Here's Block 1. Each block will be 12 inches by 12 inches once you have knitted it and blocked it. So this first block I'm calling slants because with the knitting and purling combinations that you use in the block, it creates slants. So that's why it's called slants. You need 200 yards of a worsted weight per block. We probably won't use quite that much, but just to be safe, that would be about what you would want for your total blanket. You can do the whole blanket in one color, or you can do it each block in a different color, or half one, half another. This particular block shows up pretty well in darker colors and lighter colors. So if you are somebody who's using multiple colors, this one is pretty versatile. Some of the other ones you might, and I'll say each month when I release a block what I kind of recommend for that block. But some of the other ones you might want to keep your lighter colors for so that you can see the cabling and stuff. But on this one, you could really use light or dark. And I did the first one out of Barocco Vintage worsted. This is the mushroom colorway. And I did the second one, I'm making 2 blankets, out of Dream in Color Classy. And this colorway is discontinued. I had it in my stash. It's called Melon Balm, I believe. You can kind of see. There we go. The pattern to create the slants is a combination of knitting and purling. So you knit so many, then you purl so many, and then on the next row you move that over. So it's constantly moving over a little bit. And once you do the first 10 row repeat, it really becomes easy for you to see. So it is kind of moves along without you having to look at the pattern all the time. Each block, here's my cast on at the bottom. It uses a long tail cast on. When you do the long tail cast on, the long tail cast on actually puts on your cast on plus a row. So the first row then that you physically knit, because we have a garter stitch border at the bottom, the first row that you physically will knit, called row 1 in the pattern, is your on the wrong side. So when you go to knit row 2, you're back on the right side, and I recommend in the pattern, especially for beginners, that you put a safety marker so you know right and wrong side. A lot of people don't always treat long tail as having a right or wrong side, and it doesn't really matter so much when you're doing garter because, but if you're doing stockinette, your right and wrong side for your long tail, if you use the wrong side of the cast on to be then your right side of your garment, you have little pearls along the bottom of your sweater or something like that if you're doing that kind of thing. So anyway, we do the garter bottom, and then I take you into the pattern repeat. Each block will have a garter stitch bottom and then garter stitch edges. So you will always do knit 4, and then you'll do your center stitches, knit 4. And I do recommend putting in stitch markers there just so that you don't really have to think about it as you go along. And then at the end it has a garter stitch top and just your normal basic bind off. And on this pattern you will bind off on the right side rows, because that way we have this nice bind off on the right side and we have this nice cast on edge. It'll just make it really easy when we go to seam the blocks together. Let's see, what else do I want to say? Oh, when some of the blocks, you'll always start with the same number of stitches on your garter stitch bottom, and you'll always end with the same number of stitches on each block as your garter stitch top. But in between, the stitch patterns might require a different number of stitches. So, if so, on your last row that I tell you to knit down for your garter stitch bottom, I'll give you increase or decrease instructions to get you set up on the right stitch count. And then at the top, after we've worked our center, I'll give you on the first row of your garter stitch top, I'll give you increase or decrease instructions to get us back to the same number of stitches that we casted on at the bottom. That way when you go to seam these together, you have the same number of stitches on every block across and width. For block 1, it's actually 100% reversible. Well, not 100%, the cast on edge and the bind off edge, but everything in between is reversible. So, as you work through the block, if you have any questions, please feel free to go up to the Brownie Knits Ravelry group, and I have a block thread up there, and feel free to ask questions. If you're super shy and want to PM me a message, I'm Brownie Knits, all one word, in Ravelry. And let's see, on Ravelry and on Instagram, so that we can see each other's pictures and ooh and ah over each other's blankets, if you use the hashtag BKBlanketAlong, then we'll be able to search on that hashtag and we can see each other's projects. So, I'm so excited. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. If you don't know how to do the long tail cast on, there are a lot of videos already out on YouTube showing how to do it. if we have a lot of questions about it, I can do a short video too. But if you don't know how to do it, and first of all, it's a great one to use, especially if you like to knit in the round, because when you knit in the round with the long tail cast on, you are not turning your work, so you're already on the right side for your cast on. And it's a very like stretchy cast on, so it's great for the bottom of hats and the bottom of sweaters, anything that needs to stretch a little bit more than the garment. It's just a really versatile cast on. So if you don't know how to do it, and you have any trouble finding videos and figuring it out, let me know and I will help you along through that. You can do other cast-ons for these blocks if you prefer. However, you need to know which one is then the right side, wrong side of your work. For example, I really like the cable cast-on. The cable cast-on only puts on your cast-on. So the first row that you work is your right side. So you would need to add a row to the instructions that I give you for your bottom garter stitch area. Because I'm assuming that you're following the long tail cast on instructions. When you do this blanket, if you need to do a gauge swatch to see if after you wash and block your swatch, if you get 4.5 stitches to an inch in stockinette knit. And it can vary greatly, so then if you're too tight, you want to use a larger needle. If you're too loose, you want to drop your needle size. I am a pretty loose knitter, so I knitted my blocks on a 7. Typically, if I knit something on a 7, most kind of average knitters will use an 8. If you're super loose knitter, you might need a 9. But it also really depends on the yarn that you're using. So you just need to do a block swatch. You need to do a swatch and block it and see how you're coming out. Now, with all that said, some of the blocks, as we go along, you'll see look a lot smaller when you're knitting it than when you have it blocked out. So for example, some of the lace blocks might look, you might be panicking that they only measure 10 by 11 or 11 by 11 when you're knitting it, but then when you block it out, it will grow out if you have tested your swatch to fit the gauge that I gave you in the pattern. So, and if they block out, and most of them are 12 by 12, but one of them is 11 3/4 by 12 or something like that, don't panic, because when at the end of the year when we go to put them all together, I'll show you how to kind of cheat that a little bit, so it works. And this, for instance, this one, when I knitted it, was coming out more probably like 11 by 11. But when I blocked it, it popped right out to 12 by 12. Dream in Color is 100% merino superwash, so it really, behaves like a wool and blocks out more. My vintage is an acrylic mix, so it doesn't block out quite as much. So you really just need to do a swatch and see. I thought I'd talk a little bit about what inspired each block. So some blocks will be inspired by the month that they're being released in. Some will be inspired by another Brownie Knits design that I have out. Some will be both, and some are yet to be designed, so I can't even tell you yet what those inspirations will be. But this particular block, the slants block, was developed because I was asked by a friend. She had a friend of hers who was going through chemo, and she wanted to give her a couple of hats. But this was a knitter friend, and she knew I did design work, and so she asked me to design a couple of hats. And she wanted some texture on one, and but wanted it a little bit fitted to her head too, so that she would stay nice and warm. So that's how I got started on this slants overall look, because I developed the Flossie hat. This is Flossie. Let's see. Flossie's been in storage. She's part of the trunk show. So I need to just arrange her and my bangs a little bit so I don't look silly. There we go. So the Flossie hat comes down, my ear's like right there. It fits close to your head, but you can see the spiral. You start with a moss stitch down here, and you do that for a little bit, and then you start into the slants, and it actually spirals all the way out, all the way to the tip top. So your decreases for your crown of your head are incorporated into the slanting work. And you can wear Flossie completely down, or you can add like a little vintage button pin like I have here and flip up the edge of it, because I use 2 completely reversible stitches. So there is not, it's not a big deal if you see the technically wrong side of the hat, because it'll look the same. So I really enjoy wearing and making Flossie. Whenever I wear it in public, it always gets noticed. This particular Flossie that I have on was made out of a Madeline Tosh club yarn. So the colorway is not available. But I mean, it's just a fun one. So uses a worsted or a light worsted or a DK weight yarn. And the Flossie hat pattern is available for $1.99 in Ravelry. It's also in Craftsy and on the BrownieKnits.com site. And this particular one is actually available on the Knit Picks site as well. So it's just a really fun hat, and I just love it. And yeah, so that was how I started with the slant pattern. And I like to kind of do groupings of my patterns. So if I find something that I really like doing, then I will design a hat out of it and maybe a cowl and so on and so forth. So after I did Flossie, I decided that I wanted just a cowl out of a worsted or a light worsted or a DK that would just fit close to the neck, because I wanted to make it that year for my sister-in-law for Christmas. And she's a runner, so I thought she could pop that on with her running gear and be a little toasty outside. So I designed that, and that's the Tressie cowl, and that one is also available on all the sites that I listed before, including Knit Picks. And then we moved, and then I wanted to make her fingerless mittens to go with them. So I developed the Emmalie pattern. So Flossie, Tressie, and Emmalie became a little set that I would do as gifts for people, and I released them all as patterns. So I'll put, throughout the video, I'll put little instructions where you can find those in case you want to get any of those patterns and knit those. And then we made it into spring, and I couldn't wear my Tressie and my Flossie anymore, and I wanted something, I wanted a little infinity scarf for spring, and that's when Millie was born. And Millie shows off the pattern quite well. And the reason I wanted to do this pattern in an infinity scarf, I had made a bunch of other infinity scarves from other designers and websites, and they weren't reversible. And it just bugged me to no end that I would be wearing this scarf and it would flip over and you'd see the wrong side. Now the general public in general, they don't know, right? But knitters know. And it just drove me batty. So I did a garter stitch edge on the cast on and bind off on Millie, and then did the slant pattern in the center. And this was made out of one skein of Knit Picks Hawthorn. And then I've done it out of a bunch of other fingering weights. So you just need a skein of fingering weight yarn and the Millie pattern, and you can make an infinity scarf. Now, if you wanted to make it where it would loop more than twice, you would want more yarn than that, and you would want to cast on more stitches than what I give in the pattern. And I can guide you to how you would do that if you're interested. You can just send me a private message and I'll guide you through that. So anyway, that was where the inspiration for block 1 came from. So from my set of 1920s girls named patterns. So, all right, let's see. So now we'll move into finished projects, and I only have a couple this time because it's only been a week since I podcasted. And so I have one knitted and one crocheted project. And my knitted project, I finished my Little Bobbins had her Christmas Eve sock cast on, and so I did that. And if you watched the last episode, I was intending to knit nutkins out of this Madeline Tosh sock. The color's tomato, and I started doing it and it was so tight on my foot and I wasn't enjoying it, and I just wasn't in the right mindset for having to think while I was doing my socks. I just wanted to have something that I could just knit on. And so I made just vanilla socks. I knitted them from the cuff down, but I did something a little different for me this time. I did a garter stitch heel. I used the stitch counts for the garter stitch and the row and short row instructions, which are they're short rows but they're garter, so you don't have to pick up your wraps. So it's super easy. It is from Caryn Lantz, and her website is, it's from Caryn Lantz. It's the Handspun Show Off Socks pattern. So the rest of the sock pattern, I did my own thing, but for the heel, I followed her instructions. So I just thought they were super cute. It turned out really well. I like the variation in the colorway. And so those are all finished up, blocked, and ready to be worn for the first time. So that was my finished knitted item this week. And then I was so in love with how my little niece loved her princess dress that she got for Christmas. And when I was in the shop getting the dress, they had little crowns, but I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do the dress. But then at Christmas, it just so happened that her grandmother, my mother-in-law, gave her a card that had a wand on it that you could poke out. And so it was perfect. She was spinning in her dress and she would wave her little wand. And I just thought, okay, she needs a little crown. So I went on to Ravelry and searched for Tiara, and up popped this little simple crochet pattern. And I went digging in my stash, and it is so cute. I'm so happy with it. I can't wait to send it to her. Her brother has a birthday in a few weeks, so we're sending down his birthday gifts, and I'm going to include this in there for her. So everything was from my stash. The yarn, I used a fingering weight yarn. The pattern calls for probably like a DK or a light worsted. What I just held my fingering weight doubled, and it has a lot of loft to it, so it worked pretty well. And then I used, I think, a size F hook. So I adjusted my hook size down 1 from what she said. And she gives you kind of general stitch counts for the first around part, but then she also tells you, if you didn't use her stitch count, how to figure out the placement of these. So that was really simple. So you can really use any size, any weight of yarn, and then adjust your crochet hook accordingly, and you can make it work. So I'm not really sure which sock yarn this is. I think it's a Koigu. I had leftovers from, actually there were leftovers from Ella's stocking, Christmas stocking years ago, so that worked out. So I held it doubled. I used an F hook. I crocheted it up in probably under an hour. You do just need like a regular child size headband. I just used a really thin one. You could probably just use any thickness of it you wanted. And then, believe it or not, I had these little buttons in my button stash. so it worked out perfectly, and I just hot glued them on. So, and she's old enough that, you know, if they came off, it wouldn't be a big deal, but they're really, really on there. So I just thought that was adorable. And I did put a tad bit of hot glue down here on the edges just to make sure it didn't start sliding off, and I didn't want the whole thing to come out of the headband. So I just thought it was adorable. And that's the Crochet Tiara headband from fuzzynoodlecraft.com. Just adorable. And her name is Kate Dimesh, I believe is how she would pronounce that. Cute, cute, cute. I kind of want to like keep it and wear it myself. So cute. But I mustn't. I must send it off to Miss Ella. So these were my finished objects. I don't have a huge amount of projects on my needles and hooks right now because, one, I've been working on designing the block blanket and testing that, and just, you know, takes a long time. And then two, I was inspired by everybody who is trying to finish their works in progress before they cast it on something new. So I have been working on my Oxford hooded cowl out of my Handspun 50/50 merino, 50/50 merino and silk, merino silk. So 50% merino, 50% silk, and it uses a brioche stitch, and it's coming out gorgeous. Like, I wish that you guys could touch it. Just see how springy and fun, and it's just so fun to work on, and it's so soft. So it is kind of, it's called a hooded cowl. It's, some people might call them snoods. So it will sit around my neck, but then I can pull it up to be hooded, and it's really big. And so it's been really cold here. Just in the last like 3 days, it really dropped temperature drastically. We got some snow last night, and then we're supposed to be sub-zero temperatures through this week, and in the evenings especially, but then a few days as well. So maybe a few degrees above zero on a couple of those days, and then hopefully it'll warm back up. But anyway, so that's why I'm making it, because last year it was really, really cold here for a huge amount of time. For us, we're not used to it being that cold for that long. And so I just wanted something snuggly that I can curl up in when I'm out and about in the car and just kind of snuggle into. What else do I want to say about that? Oh, I know what else it was. Last night I was knitting on it, and I was using my rosewood needles that I've had for a really long time, and it just snapped. I was pulling on it too hard. It was my fault. But it still made me sad. So I have that in my knitting bag, and then I have my IU socks that I've been working on. And I don't want to show those in every podcast, so I probably won't this time, and I'll show them next time. When I haven't been knitting or crocheting or designing, Patrick, my husband, just went back to work yesterday. He had off, in the States here, a lot of the companies had off until the 5th of January. I know some of his employees and his boss, who are both located in the UK, went back before he did. So, but anyway, he had time off, and so we like to play a lot of board games and card games while we have, usually like the holiday break at the end of the year, and then there's usually a point in the late spring, early summer, where we sit out on the deck and play a lot of card games and board games. So it can be really pretty challenging to find games that are great for just 2 people. But we found this one at a little game shop when we were at went to my oldest nephew's birthday party, and there was a game store next to it. So we swung in there, and it's been really fun to play. So it's Karma, and it's a little card game, and you the idea is that you will put down a card that is higher than the card that's on the top of the discard deck. And if you can't, then you have to pick up all the discard pile. So you're trying to be the first player to go completely out of the cards that are in your hand, and you have table cards and you have to go out of those. And there are a series of rules that make it kind of difficult, and it's called karma because at any point, it can come back to bite you, and you might have to pick up that whole stack of cards. And there are 3 give cards where you can play that and make your opponent pick up all of the discard pile. So it's quite funny with just 2 people. Sometimes you can end up with over half the deck in your hands trying to figure out what to do. So anyway, if you're just, a couple and you're looking for a game that's good for 2 people, this would be a good one to play. We also like playing Pandemic and Carcassonne. So we played both of those quite a bit. Let's see. Oh, so as I was speaking about my husband, Patrick, I've mentioned on previous podcasts that in addition to his publishing job, he also teaches writing and has written some tech books that have been published. And he's also a poet. So I thought that I would have a little segment here in the video of him reading a poem. And I'm going to set it to some pictures that I took on our honeymoon when we went to Italy, and we spent some time in Rome, and then we went to Florence and then Venice. And when we were in Florence, he was very inspired, and he wrote the poem that he's going to be reading. A portrait of a woman brushing her hair. And so I'll include some of our photos there and let you listen to him reading that poem. So here we go.
Portrait of a woman brushing her hair. Florence, June 30. You brush your wet hair in the breeze of an early evening light, backlit by a single hanging bulb. Your face shows a quiet pleasure at the bristles running through your hair like today's latest cure. You ask me to brush it for you. Your hair smells of aloe and ginseng, which I let slide through my fingers. Your eyes close. I turn off the light. In the mirror, the curtain reflects back to us our room. A fang of light from the alley twists through the lace curtains and echoes on the wall, a maze of light I tire of tracing. My fists holding shadows, I wait for sleep. Outside, a truck receives commands in Italian. Lentamente, fermate. I hear espresso machines and the clapping of hands. The Italian night has just begun. Earlier, we shared gelato, melon, colored like cantaloupes. I hear laughing and distant cars. From the thin alley beneath our window, lined with bicycles, garlic and basil mingle with the light on the breeze. The sheath of cafe swells and reorders the priority of senses. I fall asleep to foreign tunes with strands of your hair in my hands.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed Patrick's poem. It's one of my favorite poems that he has written. He often will write poems that are historical, have some historical significance, but that one was written because he was inspired on our honeymoon, which is very special. I think that's probably why I like that one the most. But it's kind of nice every now and then for Valentine's Day, or just because it's just a day, I'll get a little poem from him, and that's very sweet. So he is my favorite poet. And I thought we'd share that with you. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Let's see. I want to see if I have forgotten anything. I think this is probably a shorter podcast, which is fine. Yeah, I think that was everything. So there was one other thing. On the Brownie Knits Ravelry group, there is a thread called Getting to Know You, and I ask you 3 questions, and then people have been answering those 3 questions, and they've been fascinating to read the answers. If you go up and answer that thread, that will register you for our next giveaway, which will be in our next podcast. I'm planning on the next podcast will be up around January 21st, and at that time I'll draw from that thread to see who's going to get the next giveaway from us. So what else? If you haven't already and you want to, join the Brownie Knits Ravelry group so that you can see the discussions about the block blanket. If you have any questions about it and you want to get started, please feel free to send me a message. I'm Brownie Knits, all one word, on Instagram and Ravelry. You can also find me on Facebook, Craftsy. I think that's all the ones I'm on. And if you are finding this podcast at a later date and you want to join in, please go ahead and join in. I'm planning to keep the blocks for the 2015 blanket up free until January 31st, 2016. And then I'll decide whether I want to keep the whole block blanket as free or maybe charge a tad for it. So we'll see. But I hope that you join in. I hope everybody enjoys it. Please, if you do find a mistake, I've tried to avoid that, but if you do find a mistake, please let me know and I'll help us work through everything. So, quite nervous, but I'm very excited. So, all right. I think that's it for now. I hope everybody's doing well, and happy knitting and happy crocheting. Bye-bye.